Hello everyone, this is Grandmaster Ankit Rajpara here. A warm welcome to all of you to the special collaboration between Chess Neurons and ChessBase India. This is another episode of the Strategic Mastery series in which I'll explain a few positional puzzles. Some of the positions that I'll discuss today are from the games of one of the most famous world champions, Bobby Fischer. So let's get started with the first position. So here, Bobby Fischer had white pieces. Now, if you want to attempt this position, please pause the video here and then you can resume once you are ready with the move. So as I can notice from the position, Fischer has the double bishop advantage, but he has an isolated pawn in the center and this is being blocked by the knight. So it's not a great thing, but it's very important to understand what are certain things that is working for us in the position and what are certain things that are not so good in this position for us. So how should we try to continue? Now please remember that whenever you have the double bishop advantage, you should look at the bishop that your opponent does not have. So in this case, we can see that black has the light square bishop, but they don't have the dark square bishop. So in this case, we should try to activate a dark square bishop. Why? Because since the opponent does not have that bishop, if we activate that bishop of ours, it will be difficult for the opponent to deal with it. So what should we do? This bishop is blocked by the pawn here. The bishop is blocked by the pawns here. So should we play bishop c1? Not so quickly, because the problem is that even if it's a bit slow, then the knight will also have to move, and even if that happens, the bishop doesn't have that many targets there. So we should try to be a bit creative. Fischer did. So Fischer played b5 in this position. What's the idea? He wants to activate that bishop. Now the bishop is being blocked by those two pawns, so he wants to move those pawns and then play bishop a3 and then activate that bishop. So that's the plan, and that will put significant pressure on black's pieces because this knight is active. But if you look at these pieces, they are a bit cramped, and Fischer wants to take advantage of that, and he wants that dark square bishop to play an important role. Then opponent played bishop c8. Fischer continued with his idea of a4, then bishop a3, and this is just too much for his opponent to handle. And then rook f7, knight c4 happened, and then later on Fischer went on to win the game. Active bishop, active knight, passive pieces of black, and then it's enough for Fischer to put the pressure and then win the game. So now let's look at another position from the Fischer game. So this time Fischer has black pieces. So let's try to understand what he did. Now if you want to attempt this position, please pause the video here and then you can resume once you are ready with the move. So as it can be noticed from this position, Fischer is up a pawn. That's a good thing, but one thing that we have to remember in endgame, even if we are up a pawn, is that if we don't keep our pieces active, then we are actually giving our opponent the chance to create some activity. So we should not just be relaxed when we are up a pawn in the endgame, because that can create some problems for us, and sometimes opponent can get away with a draw by creating some activity. So Fischer is always on the alert, and despite being up a pawn, he is not going to allow any chances to the opponent. So let's try to understand what he did. So he played rook c8 in this position. He brought that rook on the open file with an idea of bringing it to the second rank to try to put pressure on the opponent. Though he had a pass pawn in this position, but one of the problems was that he could not push it because it would just get captured. So what he does, he's like, okay, I have the pass pawn, later I'll push it. Let me just bring my rook on the second rank. He'll be able to put pressure on the queen side, on the king side. So that's great. Now, say if the opponent plays something like rook b2, now the rook is not controlling the square, so you can just simply push the pass pawn, and then this is just completely dominating position for Fischer, and then he went on to win the game. So really nice, simple example about bringing the rook on the open file, keeping the pieces active in the endgame, and then pushing the pass pawn. Right, so now let's look at some positions that are not from the Fischer's games, but still instructive enough that we can learn quite a bit from them. So this is the next position. Now it is white to play here. Once again, if you want to attempt this position, please pause the video here and resume once you are ready with the move. Now, as I can notice, white has the double bishop advantage. Okay, that's good. Black does not have a pawn on f7. Black has a pawn on f4. And all of black's pawns are on light squares. So the dark squares. And because of that, the light squares of black on the king side are quite weak. Okay, so that's good. Let's play bishop b1. Let's play queen d3. Let's create the battery and then do something on those weak light squares. Not so quickly, please. We have identified our opponent's weaknesses. How about our own weaknesses? Opponent is also trying to do the same. The pawn is not on f7, pawn is on f4. So it changes certain things. Opponent is trying to play f3, and before we do something about their own king, if black is allowed to play f3, our own king side will be under severe pressure. So please pay careful attention to the opponent's, not only just opponent's weaknesses, but your own weaknesses and your opponent's ideas as well. f3 is a very serious move. The bishop will get active, the rook will get active, the knight can get here, the queen will get active, and our king side will get significantly weaker. So once we've identified that, it's clear that this has to be stopped, and we can play f3 on our own. Now pushing this pawn weakens our king a bit, but opponent does not have enough resources to take advantage of it. So we just stop f3 and then we can continue with our plans. So if the opponent brings the rook on the open file, no problem. We can also bring our rook on the open file. See, we are not in a rush to play that. We can just improve our pieces and then do it. Light square weaknesses are not going anywhere, so we are not in a rush. And let's say opponent tries to double, no problem at all. This knight is not doing much. It's time to activate it. Knight c1, knight d3. The knight can go to c5. Put pressure on the queen side as well. We are not just looking at the king side. We can do something on the queen side as well, because the pawn is on d5. That gives us some space advantage. And later, of course, we can plan for something like this as well to put pressure on the opponent's king side. But I think it will depend more on what plan black chooses. But it's clear from the position that white is the one who is better. So please remember, don't just focus on your opponent's weaknesses. Focus on your own weaknesses as well, so that you would stop your opponent's moves like f3. Right. So now let's go for the next position. So this is white to play here. And once again, if you want to attempt this position, please pause the video here and then resume it once you are ready with the move. Now this position seems to be just from the opening itself, because white has yet to develop these two pieces, black has to develop this piece, black has to castle the king. Our king is safe, by the way, that's a good thing. Some of the other things that I notice in this position is that we have a pawn in the center, but the opponent does not have, so that's good. Now what might have happened in this position, because I can see that black's up a pawn, and since it's white's move, so what might have happened is black would have played d takes c3. Now what happens whenever opponent captures something of us? We just immediately capture back. That's the reflex actually. That's what we do. So just recapture it back and then we think. So, but please don't do that. Just because our opponent has captured something does not mean we have to capture back immediately. Try to look for some other candidate moves, and then you'll be surprised. There will be moments where there will be a stronger move than just recapturing. In this position, as I can notice, white has this very interesting idea of pushing the central pawn, because this knight actually can't go anywhere. Now after e5, black tries to play d5, but that also doesn't work, because there is e takes f6, d takes e4, f takes e7, we take two pieces. So that's not good for black. So then the only square for the knight to go to will be g8. That's great for us. But after this, what if c takes b2, bishop takes b2, and knight g8? Isn't black up a pawn? But you really think for these two bishops and that knight that gets undeveloped, we are worried about our pawn? Actually, we will be welcoming that. So we should play e5. Then in this position, if c takes b2, bishop takes b2, knight g8. As I said, it's down a pawn, but white is not complaining. Look at the central pawn. Look at these rebel bishops. Look at the development of black. Look at that king in the center. We can play queen g4 in this position, putting pressure here. Let's say if g6, then queen f4. This is just too much to handle. Now let's say if the opponent is like, alright, I don't want to take the pawn, I'll play c2. No problem at all. And then the knight still has to go back, and then we can still put pressure on this pawn. So please remember, just because your opponent has captured something doesn't mean that you have to recapture. And in the opening, if you have already made your king safe, and if your opponent's king is in the center, that could be the opportunity for you to consider more active moves, because the chances of those active moves working would be pretty high, because your king is already safe while your opponent's king is not. Now let's go for the next position. So this is white to play here. Now I can notice that white has these 2 pawns in the center, so that's good. So this position is more from like the middle game, so the Benoni middle game, where white has strong center control, but black tries to create some activity through their queen side pawn majority of 3 versus 2. They try to do something on the king side as well, so it results in quite interesting middle game positions. So let's try to understand it a bit further. So I don't see any specific immediate ideas of black. So I mean, something that I should be too concerned about. So opponent can try to play maybe rook f8, try to do something. So those type of development moves will be there. But I don't see something significantly serious. So that's a good thing. Because that would allow me that I have the time to maybe try to put some pressure on the opponent's weaknesses or try to improve my own pieces. So there is something that we should notice in this position. And by the way, if you want to attempt this position before I say anything more, then please pause the video and then make an attempt here. Now, so as I've already mentioned, opponent does not seem to be having some extremely serious ideas. So let's try to understand the position from their perspective. So from their weaknesses or something that seems to be working for them. So one thing that I clearly notice in this position is the strong bishop of black. Look at this bishop. It's in the center, keeping an eye on the king side, keeping an eye on the queen side. If we compare all the other pieces, then they are nowhere close to the activity of that bishop. And that's something that we should not allow. So you should ask yourself, wait, can I do something about the most active piece of my opponent? And if we ask, then we get, in this position, we have the move knight e2. So the bishop was in the center, but one of the drawbacks of the bishop was that it had no squares to go, and we take advantage of that because we are threatening knight takes e4 to get that bishop, and the bishop can't do much about it. So rook a8, we can just capture this. By the way, be careful, the central pawn is under pressure. Don't play move like, okay, bishop c2, let me capture this. So there is no rush, that pawn is already weak. You can play rook a1, defend this. Later there can be ideas like this, or you can even move the bishop, or there can be ideas like this as well. I mean, it's just a matter of time before that pawn will fall. So the most important thing to realize here was that the most active piece of the opponent is this bishop, and if we can do something about it, that would be great. And knight e2, and we are simply able to exchange the most active piece opponent. Now let's have a quick recap of the positions that we saw. So whenever you have the double bishop advantage, please remember, try to activate the bishop of yours that the opponent does not have. So here Fischer very skillfully demonstrated by activating his dark square bishop. In this position, so we were up a pawn, but in endgame, don't just relax because you are up a pawn, try to keep your pieces active. And like Fischer did in this position, get that rook on the open file, and then when given the opportunity, push the pass pawn as well. So in this position, it was actually about, there were certain weaknesses in opponent's position, but don't get so busy in your opponent's weaknesses that you forget your own. Don't allow your opponent to play f3, otherwise your king side would be under significant pressure. Then in the opening, whenever your opponent's king is in the center and you have castled, try to consider more active moves. And more importantly, just because your opponent has captured something doesn't mean that you have to capture back immediately. You can do something like this and then put more pressure on the opponent. Now, from this position, it was about exchanging the most active piece of the opponent. So, thanks everyone for watching the video, and please provide your valuable feedback in the comments. Lastly, don't forget to check chessneurons.com, your go-to platform for improving your positional chess. I'll see you in the next video.